The wind came bitter and low across the scrub, cold enough to crack the skin if you stood still too long. The sky was the color of old tin, heavy with snow that hadn't yet decided whether to fall or wait. Sagebrush twisted like old hands across the ridgeline, and the trail that cut through the basin had long since vanished under crusted frost. She stood ankle-deep in it, the hem of her coat stiff with ice, her breath thin and uneven. The wagon wheel was splintered clean through its spokes, shattered against the granite tooth of a buried stone. The ox had collapsed some time before dawn, steam rising from its hide until it stopped breathing altogether. Maren didn't cry. She had cried 3 days earlier when the creek ran dry. She had cried when Emery coughed blood into the snow, and she had cried when they lowered him into the ground, wrapped in his own blanket. But not now. Not here. Behind her, in the shell of the wagon, 2 children huddled beneath burlap and quilts, her boy and the neighbor's girl, orphaned 2 counties back when smallpox rolled through like smoke. They didn't speak. Hunger made them slow, careful. She could not afford to fall now. Not for long. The canyon narrowed ahead, its throat dark with shadows and pines. The pass was 4 miles yet, and after that she did not know. She had clung to stories of a mission station up near White Ridge, a priest with strong hands, and a cook who gave stew to children without asking questions. She didn't know if it was real. She only knew they couldn't stay here. She went to her knees beside the dead ox and began sawing at the harness leather. Her fingers were stiff, the nails cracked and purple, but she worked with the steadiness of someone who had run out of chances. The hide pulled away with a wet rip, steam rising where flesh still held warmth. She cut strips for lashing and chewed at the knot in her throat. "I'll find a way," she whispered so low it disappeared into the snow. "Don't worry, kids, I'll find a way." Her hands paused. There was a sound, soft, rhythmical, steady as a heartbeat coming from beyond the trees. Not wind, not wolf. A shod horse moving slow and sure. She stood, the knife still in her hand. Her breath clouded around her face, sharp as glass. The trees parted, and out of the white silence came a man on horseback. He wore a dark oilskin duster and a wide-brimmed hat rimmed with frost. His horse was mottled gray and moved with the easy confidence of something that had traveled far and didn't plan on stopping. The man's eyes met hers without surprise, without judgment, just quiet recognition. As if he'd expected her to be here at the end of the world. He dismounted slowly. His boots crunched through the snow spurs, silent. "You just did," he said. A whisper, not a statement. "You found a way." He knelt by the ox, inspected the broken harness, and looked once toward the wagon. The children did not come out. He didn't ask names. Didn't ask what happened. He only pulled a flask from his coat and offered it to her. Maren took it, drank. The burn made her eyes water. "You got shelter?" she asked, voice like gravel and bone. "I do." "How far?" 2 miles west. Got a barn stove water that don't freeze." She looked toward the wagon, then at the man. There were a dozen ways this could end poorly, but she had already seen the worst of it. She was not afraid of men anymore. She was afraid of silence, of the children not waking up. "I'll carry the little one," he said without waiting for her answer. "You take the girl." He turned, walking toward the wagon like it was already decided. Like it had always been decided. Maren followed. The barn was built from rough-cut pine, its boards silvered with age, the roof low but solid. Smoke coiled from a stone chimney at the side of a lean-to cabin not far off its windows, glowing dim behind sheets of waxed paper. Inside the barn it was warmer than expected. Not warm, not safe, but less cruel. A brass lantern hung from a peg, and somewhere beneath the scent of manure and old hay was the sweetness of tobacco. He laid the boy down first, wrapping him in a saddle blanket near the stove, which hissed with fire-fed iron. Maren followed with the girl, who had stopped shaking now, though her eyes stayed open and glassy. They didn't speak. They barely breathed. But they were alive. That was something. The man didn't offer a name. He moved with the slow steadiness of someone who'd spent long years doing hard things. He filled a pot with water from a hand pump in the corner, set it on the stove, then knelt to check the children's limbs with a quiet tenderness that surprised her. Maren didn't sit. Not yet. Her hands hung useless by her sides, skin aching from thaw. The knife still rode in her coat pocket, though the stiffness in her fingers told her she'd be too slow to use it now. She watched him like an animal watches another, waiting for the twitch that means trouble. But it didn't come. He glanced at her once, then pulled an old canvas coat from a nail in the beam and handed it to her. "You're shaking," he said. "I'm not," she answered, though she was. He didn't push it, just went back to the stove and opened a small tin. The smell of beans and lard hit the air, familiar and almost painful in its comfort. He added a bit of something from his pocket, salt or jerky or both, and let it simmer. Maren sank down at last, slow, careful, not taking her eyes off him. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Why?" Why not? That was it. No story, no wound, paraded like a badge. Just the kind of answer a man gives when he's already said everything that matters to the silence. The children had fallen asleep. Maren could hear the way their breathing had softened, steady, now deep. Relief came not as a wave, but a slow settling, like snow falling from a roof once the sun hit. She leaned back against the post, still wearing her boots. Her feet throbbed and her stomach twisted with hunger. He passed her a tin plate with some of the beans, and she ate with the ferocity of someone used to going without. He ate too, sitting on an overturned bucket across from her, still watching her, not like a man watches a woman, but like a scout watches the horizon. Measuring something, waiting for a sign. "You have a name?" he asked. She chewed, then swallowed. "Maren." He nodded just once. "I'm Callan." The names hung there for a moment, weightless, half strange in the air. Names felt different out here, like promises, like secrets. She looked at him, really looked. He was maybe 35, weathered with sun-creased skin and hands that knew both rifles and reins. A scar pulled at the edge of his jaw, pale against the dark stubble. His hair was long enough to curl under the brim of his hat, which he had not yet taken off. "You always pull people out the snow." "Only when they're worth it." She narrowed her eyes. "And how'd you figure I was?" He stirred the fire with a bit of kindling, then leaned back. "You were cutting leather off a dead ox to drag your children through a canyon in winter. Not many folk left who'd do that." She said nothing, just stared into the flames, letting them bite at her eyes until they watered. When the silence came again, it wasn't empty. It held the weight of something growing, something slow and alive. Neither of them spoke more that night. When she finally lay down near the stove, pulling the girl's small body close to hers, she kept her hand on the knife, though not from fear. Old habits were hard to kill. Outside, the wind screamed over the ridges and pressed hard against the barn. But it didn't get in. If you felt the weight of silence and still searched for hope, subscribe and share this path. In the days that followed, the cold tightened its grip. Snow fell without pause, blanketing the basin in silence so complete it seemed to swallow every sound. Time thinned. Hours bled into one another without shape, only marked by the slow routine of survival. Callan made no demands. He rose before dawn, fed the horses split wood, stoked the stove, and rode the fence line to check for breaks or drift. Maren watched, at first wary, waiting for the mask to slip. But it never did. He moved through his tasks with quiet steadiness, neither showing off nor avoiding notice. A man at peace with labor and maybe with being alone. The children improved slowly. The boy Jonas started talking again, mostly in whispers, to the girl whom he called Addie. Addie did not speak, but she smiled, sometimes soft and uncertain, like the smile itself had forgotten how to work. Maren busied herself with chores. She washed what she could, dried the children's clothes by the stove, swept the barn, and cooked when he brought back rabbits or dried stores from the cabin. She didn't ask what he kept in there. He didn't offer. On the 5th day, the sky cleared for the first time and the wind settled into a hush. Maren stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the snow's glare. The world looked clean, endless. Her breath steamed out in front of her, and her boots crunched with each careful step. She wasn't sure how far she could walk if she had to. Her strength hadn't come back fully, but her mind was sharper now. She felt it in the way her body moved, aware, grounded, still guarded, but less afraid. She found him near the corral, nailing a broken board back into place. A hammer hung from his belt, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbow, skin red from the cold. "You planning to stay through spring?" he asked without turning. "That's your way of asking if I plan to leave. I don't ask questions I don't want answers to." She stepped closer, tugging the wool shawl tighter around her. "I've been thinking about that, about what comes next. And there ain't much waiting for us back where we came from." He nodded, setting the hammer down and leaning on the post. "I figured. You've got grit, Maren. That much is plain. But grit alone don't keep you warm through February." She laughed softly, more exhale than sound. "No, it doesn't." He looked at her then, not just a glance. His eyes were a washed-out gray, the kind that carried every mile he'd traveled. He didn't smile, but there was something in his face that wasn't hardness. "You could stay," he said, "long as you need. I don't take charity." "Good. I don't give it." They stood in the cold silence, blooming between them like a slow-growing flame. Not romantic. Not yet. Just honest. Rooted. "You ever had a family?" she asked, voice quiet. "I did. A long time ago. Parents gone before I was old enough to remember much. Had a brother once. He went south, chasing silver, never came back. And no wife." He shook his head. "I was a different man then," he said. "Didn't know how to hold anything that mattered. Never tried again." She didn't ask more. The space between people out here was sacred. Push too hard and they'd fold up like a wagon map. That night they sat near the stove while the children slept, and she stitched a tear in his coat. He watched her hands work the neat rhythm of needle and thread, and he said something about his mother teaching him to mend boots with deer sinew. The story didn't matter much, but the telling did. Later, when the wind picked up again and the snow began to fall soft and fine, she watched him from the bedroll across the room. He didn't know she was watching. He sat with his head bowed, eyes closed, lips moving in what might have been a prayer or maybe just memory. Maren turned away, pulled the blanket over her shoulder, and closed her eyes. She didn't feel alone anymore. By the 2nd week, the snow eased enough for Callan to take the wagon into town. He left early, wrapped in that old oilskin with a list Maren had scribbled on scrap parchment. She gave it to him folded, then tucked the children back under their covers, not sure if he'd come back at all. But he did. By dusk, the wagon wheels were creaking back up the trail, heavier than before, and when he stepped down, his beard was thick with frost, his coat powdered with snow. He said little, just handed her the parcels: flour, lard, dried beans, a bar of yellow soap, and 3 nails wrapped in cloth. One for each child's shoes worn through. One for the hinge on the barn that dragged like a wounded leg. He didn't ask how the day went. She didn't ask what the townsfolk had said when they saw him ride in with a list written in a woman's hand. That night they ate biscuits hot from the pan and sat near the fire, not speaking much, just being still. It was enough. Days passed like this, quiet, careful. A kind of rhythm emerged. She taught Jonas how to set snares. Callan showed her how to tie harness knots that would hold even through sleet. He let her lead the gelding one morning, guiding the animal through the snowpack while Addie clutched her waist from behind. "You're not bad with horses," he said when they got back. "I'm better with mules." He chuckled low in his throat. "Ain't we all?" But not everything softened. There were nights when Maren woke slick with sweat, Her breath caught in her chest. She'd stare into the dark and remember Emery's hand going cold in hers, or the look the preacher gave her after they buried Addie's mother, like Maren had failed at something sacred. She'd curl tighter around the children and count her breaths. One morning, as she stirred ashes in the stove, she found Callan staring at the horizon, rigid as a fence post. "Riders," he said. Her spine went stiff. How many? 3. Could be passing through. Could be not. She turned to the children, her voice brisk. "Get inside. Don't ask why. Just go." They obeyed without question. Callan saddled the horse in silence, loaded a rifle onto the back straps. He didn't act like a man preparing for battle, more like someone used to uncertainty, someone who knew that trouble didn't always announce itself with noise. By mid-afternoon, the riders passed, didn't stop, didn't wave, just shadows on horseback moving west with dust in their wake. Still, something shifted. That night, Callan spoke as he whittled by the fire. "There's men out there who remember me." Not kindly. She looked up from where she was mending a boot. "You do something worth remembering. I rode with men I shouldn't have. After my brother died, thought I'd make fast money, settle down later. Turns out later don't always come." She nodded once. "You hurt anyone?" He stopped whittling. "Not unless I had to. Same as me then." And that was all. Later, when they lay in their separate corners of the barn, he said quietly into the dark, "They come back, you and the children take the mule trail east. There's water halfway and an old ranch house near the canyon lip. Wait 3 days. If I don't come, you keep going." "I'm not running. I'm not asking." But she didn't agree. And he didn't push it. That was the first time she realized she didn't want to leave. And not because of safety or food or the way her hands no longer shook when she lit the fire, but because somewhere between the silence and the storm, this place had started to feel like a home. The thaw came late. Winter lingered long past its welcome, clinging to the hills like an old grief. But by mid-March, the snow began to rot at the edges, curling back from the rocks like pulled skin. Streams reappeared as threads of silver under the ice, and birds returned quiet, at first uncertain, like they too weren't sure if it was time. Maren stepped out into the half-light one morning and found mud instead of frost under her boots. She crouched and ran a hand over the ground. It gave way easy, soft as bread dough. Her breath caught. Inside the barn, Callan was mending tack. He looked up when she entered, saw her face. "It's breaking," she said. "The freeze." He nodded. "You thinking of leaving?" She didn't answer right away. She sat near the stove, rubbed her hands together. Her fingers were red with cold and work, the calluses deepening with every week. She hadn't thought of them as temporary, not lately. "The girl," she said, "Addie, she called me Mama last night." He didn't react with surprise, just waited. "I didn't correct her." "Why would you?" Maren looked into the fire. "Because she ain't mine. She's yours now." That settled something. Or maybe it just named what had already been settled. "I don't know if I'm ready to stay forever," she said. "But I'm not ready to leave either." Callan stood, stretched his back. "The thing about staying," he said, "is you don't have to say it out loud. You just keep waking up in the same place." That night they ate around the stove again, and Maren watched Jonas carve a stick into the shape of a horse tongue, caught in his teeth like he was stitching something real. Addie curled in her lap, asleep before the food cooled. Callan passed her a cup of water. His fingers brushed hers. They didn't speak of it, but that touch hung in the air. Weeks passed and the thaw bloomed into spring. The land shifted fast from white and gray to wet greens and copper earth. Life came back like a wound healing, slow but inevitable. They built a pen for the chickens Callan had traded for in town. Maren took over the cooking and Callan taught Jonas how to ride bareback. Addie started singing soft little rhymes she made up on the spot, stringing nonsense into something sweet. Maren found herself humming while she swept the barn. One morning, as she hung a line of wash, she saw a cloud of dust rise from the east. A rider. Alone. She called for Callan. He came fast, rifle and hand boots half-laced. The man didn't come fast. His horse limped, thin and weary. He wore a banker's coat and a wide cravat, dusty with travel. His beard was trimmed, his boots polished beneath the road wear. He was not a drifter. He looked like someone who lived behind doors. "You Callan Ward?" the man called out. Callan stepped forward. "Who's asking?" The man didn't smile. "Name's Redlin. I'm here on behalf of a legal matter. Land title complications in St. Joseph. You've got folks looking for you." Maren stepped beside Callan. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. "You want me to go?" she said low. Callan didn't move. "No. You stay." The man dismounted stiffly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. But your name's tied up in some things. Some old things." Callan's jaw clenched. "I've paid every debt I owed." Redlin shrugged. "Not to the ones who bought your brother's claim. Turns out there's value in what he left behind." Callan stepped forward, eyes cold. "That claim was stolen. Nothing there was rightfully sold. I'm not here to argue that." Redlin pulled a satchel from his horse, handed it over. "There's paperwork. Names. You've got 2 weeks to respond or the courts will assume abandonment. You walk away, they take everything, this land included." He turned to go, hesitated. "There's people who'd like to see you fail, Ward. They think you're hiding something out here." He looked at Maren, then just briefly. "Maybe you are." Then he rode off, leaving silence in his wake. Callan didn't speak for a long time. Just stood there, fists clenched. Maren waited. "You want me to leave now?" she asked. He looked at her, and for the first time there was fear behind his eyes. "Not of men. Of loss." "No," he said. "Not now. Not ever." Then he turned and walked inside. And Maren followed him like it was already decided. That night the fire burned low, but no one slept. The children were quiet in their cots, their breathing soft as rain. Callan sat by the stove, a stack of papers spread before him untouched. His elbows rested on his knees, head bowed. The kind of stillness that comes only when a man is pulling something loose from deep inside, slow and painful. Maren sat across from him, hands wrapped around a tin mug long gone cold. "You gonna fight it?" she asked. Callan didn't look up. "I don't know if it's worth the fight." Silence again, broken only by the creak of the roof settling in the cool. "I buried Emery without a marker," she said. "Only man who ever loved me for more than my usefulness. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And when he died, the preacher asked if I wanted to say something over the grave. I couldn't speak. I just stood there thinking about all the things I should have said when he was still breathing. What I should have fought for." He looked at her now. "I ain't making that mistake again," she said. He swallowed hard, jaw tightening. "It's just land, Maren." "No," she said. "It's not." She stood, walked over, and picked up the folded deeds from the floor. "You bled into this ground. You built a life here when no one thought you would. These kids are safe because of this place. That's more than soil and trees." He stared at the papers. Then finally he nodded once. A small thing, but heavy. Over the next days, Callan rode into town to speak with the local judge. He came back late, weary, but carrying new names and possibilities. Redlin hadn't lied, the claim was tangled. The men who bought it had money, reach, and a fondness for legal tricks. But they weren't gods. Maren worked the land in his absence. Jonas helped chop wood, Addie fed the hens. Life didn't pause for trouble. That was the truth of the frontier. You carried the weight and kept moving. One morning Callan returned with news. "They're offering a settlement," he said. "They keep the silver rights. I keep the land. Marin raised her eyebrows. Fair? No, but I can live with it. She nodded. Then that's the answer. But it wasn't done. Later that week, 2 men arrived on horseback dressed not like lawyers but like thugs in polished boots. One of them leaned on the barn door with a smirk that made Marin's fingers twitch toward the knife she no longer kept tucked in her belt. Real shame, the man said, flicking his gaze across the yard. You got a pretty setup here. Be a damn shame if something happened while you were signing papers. Callan stood behind her, calm. You threatening me? He asked. The man smiled wider. No, sir. Just admiring the fragility of things. Marin stepped forward, eyes level. You ever lost a child in your arms? She asked. The man faltered. What? She stepped closer. Ever buried a husband in frozen dirt, ever gone 3 days without eating so the ones depending on you might live long enough to see spring? He shifted, uncertain now. Didn't think so, she said. So let me put this plain. We don't scare. We endure. Callan placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle. Go inside, he said. She didn't move, but the men did. They turned and rode out, muttering something about fools and wasted dirt. When they were gone, Callan let out a slow breath. You're something else, Marin. I've had to be. He nodded, looked toward the horizon. I want to build a house here, he said quietly. Not a cabin. A real one. With windows and a porch and a room for each child. She looked at him, the weight of everything they'd lived pressing in around that simple dream. You want to build it alone? He turned, met her eyes. No, not anymore. She stepped closer, slow. Then we build it together. His hand brushed hers, fingers sliding into place like they'd always belonged there. And for once the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like something you could plant in the ground and grow. They started with the foundation. Callan dug the post holes while Marin hauled water from the creek, her boots sinking deep in the thawed mud. Jonas ran tools between them like a boy twice his age, solemn in his labor, proud in the way only a child can be when finally trusted with real work. Addie sat in the shade of the old cottonwood tree, snapping beans into a tin pail and humming her made-up songs. They worked until their backs ached, until the sun sank low behind the pines and the air smelled of sawdust, sweat, and promise. The nights came cool again, but not bitter, and they ate meals around the fire pit, boots off, their laughter rising into the dark like sparks. Marin didn't know when it changed, when the distance between her and Callan softened into closeness, but it wasn't sudden. It was a glance that lingered longer than it needed to. A hand on her back when she stood too fast. The way he watched her from across the room, as if memorizing something he never wanted to forget. She'd caught herself singing once, hanging laundry, the old hymn her mother used to hum while snapping beans. She stopped mid-note, startled by the sound in her throat. It had been years since a song had found its way out of her. That night, after the children were asleep and the stars were just beginning to scatter across the sky, she stepped out of the barn to find him on the porch frame, a bottle beside him, his legs dangling over the edge like a boy. You drink alone? She asked. He smiled without looking. Not if someone sits with me. She joined him, taking the bottle, tipping it back without flinching. They passed it back and forth, quiet between them. I never thought I'd get another chance, she said. Not after Emery. Not after all that came after. Callan nodded. Me neither. They sat like that for a long time, the stars blinking into their places above them. He turned to her, then, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. You ever think about staying for good? She looked out over the land, the rough posts, the drying lumber, the barn lit with lantern glow. I think about it every day. His hand reached for hers. She let it. I ain't asking for promises, he said. Just the truth. This is the truth, she whispered. I'm here. He leaned in. Not fast, not urgent, just a question in the shape of a kiss. And she answered, The house took shape through summer. Walls rose, window frames were set, and Marin planted herbs in a narrow garden by the steps before the door was even hung. Neighbors began to appear. Some came curious, some cautious. A few brought jars of jam, old nails, or stories too long to be told in a single visit. A man named Ellsworth helped them raise the roof. His daughter gave Addie a doll made of corn husk and twine. Marin saw herself in those new faces, tired but trying. Each person who showed up helped stitch them into the land a little deeper. Callan carved a beam for the porch with his father's initials and left space beside it. "Thought maybe you'd want to put yours there too," he said. She didn't answer at first, just held the chisel in her hand, running her fingers over the wood. Then slowly she carved the letters M.T. "I didn't take Emery's name," she said. "Felt like a coat that never fit." Callan nodded. "Then keep the one that does." On the first day of October, they moved into the house. It wasn't finished, windows still missing panes, the kitchen stove not yet connected, but it was theirs. They laid out quilts on the floor and slept in a pile like wolves, the fire popping in the hearth, the wind howling outside the way it always did across open plains. But this time, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like home. Winter returned the way it always did, quiet at first, almost gentle. Frost crept over the windows like lace. The pond near the barn froze at the edges, and the wind took on that clean, sharp scent that always made Marin's shoulders stiffen before she remembered this year was different. This year she had walls that held, a fire that burned through the night, children who laughed in their sleep, and a man who never left her wondering where he'd gone. One evening after supper, Jonas fell asleep at the table, arms folded over his half-finished drawing. Addie was curled by the fire with her new doll, rocking it in her arms and whispering stories. Callan came in from the cold, brushing snow from his shoulders. His face was red from the wind, eyes bright with the sting of it. He stopped in the doorway, took them all in, the flickering lantern light, the sound of Addie's voice, the half-hummed tune Marin caught herself humming. "You all right?" she asked, rising to take his coat. He handed it off, nodded once. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart. It won't." "You sure?" "No," she said. "But I'm still here." He looked at her like that meant more than anything else ever could. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her something wrapped in muslin. "What's this?" "Open it." She pulled the cloth back slow. Inside was a ring, simple, smooth, made of rosewood, polished dark with oil and time. No gem, no shine, just solid and true. "I carved it," he said, "from the tree out back, the one Addie calls hers." Marin held it in her palm. It was warm from his body, shaped by his hands. He didn't kneel, didn't ask, just said, "I want us to keep building. Even when it gets hard, even when it gets quiet." Her throat caught. "You sure?" "I'm not sure of much," he said, "but I'm sure of you." She looked down at the ring again. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't fine, but it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever held. She slid it onto her finger. They didn't kiss then. They just stood there, foreheads resting together, the room gone soft and quiet around them. By spring, the house was finished. The garden doubled in size, the hens started laying again, and Addie sang louder now, her voice clear and sure. Jonas helped Callan build a smokehouse behind the shed and wrote his name in the concrete foundation with a stick. They held the wedding on the porch, just them and the children, with old Ellsworth saying the words. Marin wore a white blouse and her mother's brooch. Callan shaved for the first time in weeks. Addie carried a bouquet of wildflowers and called herself Flower Girl, giggling like she'd invented the idea, after they ate cornbread and smoked trout. The sun dipped behind the hills and fireflies lit up like stars come down to rest for a while. When the children were tucked into bed and the house was dark, Marin stepped outside onto the porch. The land rolled quiet before her all the way to the dark rim of the hills. Callan came out behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I hoped." They stood in silence, the kind that meant they didn't need words. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, soft and slow. A lantern swayed gently on its hook, casting gold over the porch rail, where two names had been carved into the beam side by side. M.T. and C.W. Below it, a child's hand had scrawled two more letters, J and A. Maren smiled, leaned into him. "We're not alone anymore," she whispered. "No," he said, "we're not." The stars turned above them, quiet as breath. And somewhere deep in the heart of the earth, spring stirred again. If you want to hear more voices rising from dust and despair, subscribe now.